Helios Airways Flight 522's crash is considered one of the 21st century's most unusual and shocking aviation accidents. It was a Boeing 737 that crashed near Grammatiko in eastern Greece. But what exactly caused this so-called ghost plane to crash? How many passengers died? Stick to the end of the video to find out. Hello and welcome to Plane Crashes Explained, where we discuss some of the most mind-blowing reasons and facts behind the most heinous plane crashes. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss future updates. Without further ado, let's get straight into this. The aircraft involved in this accident, initially registered as D-ADBQ, flew for the first time on December 29, 1997, and was operated by DBA in 1998. Helios Airways leased it on April 16, 2004, and it was re-registered 5B-DBY with the nickname Olympia. The Helios fleet also included two leased Boeing 737-800s and an Airbus A319-100, both of which were delivered on May 14, 2005. On the day of the accident, the plane arrived at Larnaca International Airport at 1:25 local time. It was scheduled to depart Larnaca at 9 o'clock and fly to Prague-Ruzyne International Airport, stopping at Athens International Airport at 10:45. Hans-Jürgen Merten, a 58-year-old German contract pilot hired by Helios for holiday flights, was the flight's captain. He had been flying for 35 years and had accumulated a total of 16,900 flight hours. The plane carried 115 passengers and a crew of 6. 67 passengers were scheduled to disembark in Athens, and the remainder continued to Prague. There were 93 adults and 22 children on the passenger list. There were 103 Cypriots and 12 Greeks among the passengers. The previous flight crew had reported a frozen door seal and abnormal noises coming from the right aft service door when the plane arrived in Larnaca from London earlier that morning. They asked for a thorough examination of the door. A ground engineer performed the inspection, followed by a pressurization leak check. The pressurization system was set to manual to perform this check without using the aircraft's engines. However, after the test, the engineer failed to reset it to auto. The flight crew ignored the pressurization system state on 3 occasions after the aircraft was returned to service, during the pre-flight procedure, the after-start check, and the after-takeoff check. No one on the flight deck noticed the incorrect setting during these checks. At 9:07, the plane took off with the pressurization system still set to manual and the aft outflow valve partially open. The pressure inside the cabin gradually decreased as the plane climbed. The cabin altitude warning horn sounded as it passed through an altitude of 12,040 feet. The warning should have caused the crew to stop climbing, but it was misidentified as a takeoff configuration warning, which indicates that the aircraft is not ready for takeoff and can only be heard on the ground. Both warnings have the same alert sound. Several warning lights on the cockpit's overhead panel illuminated over the next few minutes. The master caution light and one or both of the equipment cooling warning lights are illuminated to indicate low airflow through the cooling fans. When the oxygen masks in the passenger cabin automatically deployed at an altitude of about 18,000 feet, the passenger oxygen light illuminated. The captain radioed the Helios Operations Center shortly after the cabin altitude warning sounded, reporting the takeoff configuration warning on and cooling equipment normal and alternate offline. He then called the ground engineer and repeatedly stated that the cooling ventilation fan lights were turned off. "Can you confirm that the pressurization panel is set to auto?" the engineer inquired. However, the captain, who was already experiencing the early symptoms of hypoxia, ignored the question and instead asked, "Where are my equipment cooling circuit breakers?" This was the aircraft's final communication. The plane continued to climb until it reached flight level 340, or about 34,000 feet. Nicosia ATC made several unsuccessful attempts to contact the aircraft between 9:30 and 9:40. The aircraft entered the Athens Flight Information Region, FIR, at 9:37 without contacting Athens ATC. There was no response to 19 attempts to contact the aircraft between 10:12 and 10:50, and at 10:40 the aircraft entered the holding pattern for Athens Airport at the KEA VOR, still at flight level 340. It remained in a holding pattern for the next 70 minutes, controlled by the autopilot. At 11:05 a.m., 2 Hellenic Air Force 111th Combat Wing F-16 fighter jets were scrambled from Nia Anchialos Air Base to establish visual contact. At 11:24 a.m., they intercepted the passenger jet and noticed that the first officer was slumped motionless at the controls and that the captain's seat was empty. They also stated that oxygen masks were dangling in the passenger cabin. Andreas Prodromou, a flight attendant, entered the cockpit and sat in the captain's seat at 11:49, having remained conscious by using a portable oxygen supply. Paris Charalambous, his girlfriend, was also seen in the cockpit assisting Prodromou in an attempt to control the aircraft. Prodromou had a commercial pilot license in the United Kingdom, but was not qualified to fly the Boeing 737. Prodromou waved briefly at the F-16s, but immediately after entering the cockpit, the left engine flamed out due to fuel exhaustion. The plane left the holding pattern and began to descend. According to crash investigators, Prodromou's experience was insufficient for him to gain control of the aircraft under the circumstances. However, as the engines flamed out, Prodromou could steer the plane away from Athens and toward a rural area. There were no casualties on the ground. The right engine flamed out 10 minutes after the left engine lost power, and the plane crashed into hills near Grammatiko, 40 kilometers from Athens, killing all 121 passengers and crew on board. The flight data and cockpit voice recorder were delivered to the Paris-based Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety. Investigators identified Prodromou as the flight attendant who entered the cockpit to try to save the plane, thanks to the CVR recording. He called Mayday 5 times, but ATC didn't hear him because the radio was still tuned to Larnaca, not Athens. Colleagues who listened to the CVR recording recognized his voice. The post-impact fire had burned many of the bodies beyond recognition. Autopsies on the crash victims revealed that all were alive at the point of impact, but it was unclear whether they were conscious. The emergency oxygen supply in the passenger cabin of this model of Boeing 737 is provided by chemical generators, which provide enough oxygen via breathing masks to sustain consciousness for about 12 minutes, which is normally enough for an emergency descent to 10,000 feet, where atmospheric pressure is sufficient for humans to sustain consciousness without supplemental oxygen. The cabin crew have access to portable oxygen sets that last much longer. On August 29, 2005, the company announced the successful completion of safety checks on their Boeing fleet and re-entered service. Its name was later changed from Helios Airways to AJet. However, when Cyprus authorities detained the company's aircraft and froze its bank accounts about a year later, the airline announced that it would cease operations on October 31, 2006. Following the incident, several fake photographs purporting to depict the aircraft involved in Helios Flight 522 circulated, claiming to be the final photographs of the aircraft taken during its intercept by the Hellenic Air Force before it crashed. These images, depicting a Helios Airways Boeing 737 accompanied by F-16s, were discovered to be fabricated. The aircraft depicted in the image is 5B GBH Zela, a Boeing 737-800 in service with Helios at the time of the incident, distinguished by its overwing exits, longer fuselage, and trailing-edge wingtips. The Federal Aviation Administration issued an airworthiness directive in March 2011, requiring all Boeing 737 aircraft from 100 to 500 models to be equipped with 2 additional cockpit warning lights. These would point to issues with the takeoff configuration or pressurization. Aircraft on the Civil Register in the United States were required to have the additional lights by March 14, 2014. On July 24, 2007, the families of the deceased filed a lawsuit against Boeing. Konstantinos Drungas, their lawyer, stated, "Boeing installed the same alarm for 2 different types of malfunctions. One was a minor flaw, but the other, a lack of oxygen in the cockpit, was critical." He also stated that similar issues had previously occurred on Boeings in Ireland and Norway. The families sued Boeing for 76 million euros in compensation. The Boeing case was settled out of court. An Athens prosecutor charged 6 former employees with manslaughter in connection with the incident in early 2008. According to reports, the suspects were 3 Cypriots, 2 Britons, and 1 Bulgarian. Investigators in Greece blamed the Helios Airways flight crash outside Athens on a human error after the plane failed to pressurize after taking off from Larnaca Airport. Prosecutors in both countries blamed airline officials for cutting corners on safety operations, while claiming that they ignored advice that the pilots did not meet the required aviation standards. Helios Airways rebranded as AJet and ceased scheduled operations in March 2006. Despite this, in November of that year, it permanently suspended its remaining charter flights and ceased to exist as an airline. Still, the fault in the cabin's pressurization was a huge error that claimed so many lives. That all could have been avoided only if people were a little more vigilant. What do you think? Whose fault was it? Let us know in the comments section. If you liked the video, here are 2 more that might interest you. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like on the video and share it with your friends.